We're going to move from pharmacy finally to the final segment of today. We're going to focus on another really critical part of healthcare. It's the pharmaceutical industry. Many of you here represent that industry. If, as we say, much of the unbelievable improvements in health outcomes that have come in recent years are due to the discovery, manufacture, and distribution of medications and development and introductions of new devices, then these companies have to embrace patient-centered care. Most patients and physicians have more immediate contact with medications, so we're going to focus on the pharmaceutical rather than the device industry. But it's delightful that we have someone representing Medtronic here, and I hope this makes sense, this patient engagement makes sense to them. A healthcare strategist said recently, the most intriguing opportunity for pharma in 2013 is the space where the dialogue between healthcare professionals and patients takes place. That's the space where pharma should be. So we're lucky enough to talk about that space, Dr. Salvatore Alessi. He's the Vice President of Scientific Affairs at the professional organization, Pharma. And Salvo, please.
Thank you very much, Harry. Thanks for the invitation on behalf also of our association and our members. It's always a challenge to be last in particular such a high-quality conference like this. There are some advantages, I must say, that you have learned a lot, and probably you can incorporate the learning in what you are going to say. And in addition to the challenges related to weekends and cardiometabolic change after lunch, there is the challenge that people tend to remember usually the things that come last. So big responsibility. But this has been a great audience, has been actually very engaging discussion with your personalized touch on this, very pleasantly engaging. So what I'd like to do is perhaps add a couple of perspectives, but I would like to start by saying that I'm very excited, and I hope you feel the same, that this is a very interesting time for our healthcare. Keep saying it can be summarized by a bunch of words that starts with P. We are moving towards more precise medicine, more personalized medicine. I would just say more participatory medicine. And what we heard, of course, the focus of today is more patient-centered or patient-focused, if you want. Now, what intrigued me is the discussion that we had at the beginning, that it almost seems to be so complex, this issue of defining patient-centered healthcare and so on. Really, if you think back, I guess that each one in this room decided to do what he or she is doing, thinking with the patient in mind, thinking about their relation, thinking about transforming the life of that patient. So I guess the only explanation that I have for this, as somebody that has been in a number of settings, from being a practicing physician, an NIH scientist, an industry physician and scientist, and now part of a trade association, is that that sort of industrialization and bureaucratization, if you want, of medicine slowly took our attention away from what the focus really of what we decided to do was. So we are living a time where, why do I need to really listen so much to a patient when I can use a 6 Tesla MRI and, probably have all the information that I need? Or I can just, do the most complete screening, and probably they will tell me as much. The problem is not going to tell you as much. And I think the challenge really here, it's a mind shift. Or I would just say it's a mind shift back to really what the roots are. So those were more kind of reflection that I wanted to share with you based on what I've really been listening. But what I would really like to focus my specific portion of contribution to this meeting is hopefully convince you that that sort of engagement of the patient, we heard a lot about patients and healthcare and the engagement that strengthening the relation on the healthcare side. That patient centrality is as important to achieve upstream on the clinical research side. And in fact, I guess at the end of this conversation, I hope to convince you at least that that's a continuum. I think this distinction that we created between clinical research and clinical care is completely artificial, and in fact has contributed to part of the issue that we are facing. So that sort of centrality of the patient should start up front and continue all the way from research to care. Which make it particularly challenging, even more challenging in terms of the type of engagement that we have to achieve, and why. Well, drug development, it's really a complex business. It's one that is necessary. We're not going to have access to transforming medicine if we don't invest in research and if we don't do it very, very carefully and thoughtfully, which is what not just our member, but our members in partnership with the entire ecosystem, hospital, academicians, and of course the patient do. But it's quite complex. It's kind of difficult to explain. It's sometimes daunting for us that we are in this business to understand all the different element of this. What we know, and I think what most patients know, is it works. It works. I mean, medicine have really transformed the life of patients, and I, almost embarrassed to show some numbers here to an audience of, healthcare specialists, but I'm sure that you have seen this more than anybody else. And when I say you, I mean you and your patient. So, one important component of bringing innovative medicine to those that need them is the clinical evaluation of medicine. And I must say that, and I invite here my colleagues actually to correct me if you think I'm wrong, that we are really still doing clinical trial and projecting to the 21st century in a way that is really not adapted to the 21st century. The way of doing clinical trial is very siloed. It's very temporary. You build this very complex, expensive infrastructure specifically tailored to one trial, and then they disappear. And unfortunately, it is a way where patients are thought of as subjects. And that is really, a very different, approach to what now we are slowly moving. I would just argue even the word patient is the wrong one. We probably should get rid of it and talk about person and people, because I'm telling you, when you are sick, you probably don't have too much patient. You want the information now, you want the treatment now. It's a legitimate thing to say. But I guess what I'm saying is, and what we are start to observing, otherwise none of us would be here, is that patient centrality. I would just actually add to that a word that I really like much better is, moving from patient as subject to patient as participant. And I think that participation has to go along the spectrum. It's part of an ecosystem. We are, just before about, cardio-smart ecosystem. I put here the clinical trial ecosystem. That's wrong too. It's like this continuum of clinical care and clinical research, clinical care ecosystem. Now, the fact that the patients are the center doesn't mean though that, we should have involvement of patient with the regulator in isolation, then the patient talk to the researcher, or the industry talk to the advocacy, and so on. So I think, and I will provide an example of an initiative that we are really launching that I can speak to that. Another important component is we are moving more and more, not just into a participatory healthcare system, but into a collaborative. And to me, that sort of integrated approach, it is really what it's needed ultimately to advance healthcare. I can tell you pharma has been very active, not just try to engage at a different level patient advocacy organization, even bringing to our headquarters, talking more about clinical trials, what it means participating in clinical trial. But we have worked together with the regulators and as well as patient advocacy organization into start defining what does it mean, patient-centered drug development, and that's a complex issue, and as well as a number of other more specific initiative, project-based, where we are trying to help our member company understand how they can better engage patients in providing input on how to design a clinical trial, particularly patient-reported outcomes. That's patient-reported outcome, and you need that input up front. So certainly complexity within complexity, because I think at least in the relation, patient, physician, and healthcare, that there is something built there. It's just, again, going back to your roots here, it's really a kind of a mind shift. Let me now go into some sort of issue which I think are part of this discussion and will provide a segue into, again, what I think, why I think it's even as important as involving patients in healthcare more directly to involve them in clinical research. This number, and these are pretty old too, I think if you look at more recent one, a little bit worse, show the increased burden of clinical trial. Now, part of the burden has to do with some of the regulatory requirements, larger and larger population and longer trials and so on. The reality is that, if you look at the bottom of this graph, we have two major issues here, which is they are both related to the lack of participation or reduction in participation of patients to clinical trial. So I think now that we have the tools, we have ways to get patients more engaged. That seems pretty strange that we have such a profound decline. Now, this decline first and foremost has an impact on the patient. Because less participation means it takes more time for them to have opportunity, at least to have access to a medicine. It, of course, has implication in terms of cost of clinical trials, because every day that you delay a trial has substantial financial implication. And then there are like some subset of issues related to this. For example, if you just look at some stats, this seems to be much more of an issue among certain communities where we have more diverse population. If you look at African American, which is a population, as you very well know, who's largely afflicted by cardiovascular disease and so on, represent 12%, and we have only 5% of clinical trial participants, much less in the Hispanic population. And again, I don't like to use the word minority because these are not minority anymore. These are probably majority very soon. But beyond the, if you want, beyond the specific of the wording, the issue here is, first of all, from a scientific standpoint, I think we all want that the medicine that eventually our patient will take are really representative of the population where they've been evaluated. It's a sort of not just a scientific question, but it's an important ethical question. Then there is the issue again of disparity. I think we as an organization have been very, very active, working again with a number of associations in making sure that we promote a number of initiatives to avoid disparity in access to medicine. But I think we are now moving more towards using the same approach to avoid disparity in access to research. Now, let me tell you this. This is a complex problem. If you just look at this particular set of patient or population, there are a number of issues there that are listed for you if you want to read, and that's just a short list. The point I want to make is this is not an issue that can be just tackled by saying we need to engage the patient more effectively and put them as the center. This means engaging patient and physician at the same time, and in fact, their community. And I think this is an area where really our members start working very hard through a number of ways. There have been creation of Office of Diversity, of Chief Diversity Officer under CMO. There has been a lot of program being launched. The reality is not something that even the industry can tackle alone. And actually, I can tell you one of the reasons for I was very excited to be here because I would think that this partnership with association like ECC and others is absolutely fundamental to really transform the clinical trial ecosystem that we are facing. So where I'm going with this is, pretty much clinical research and clinical care are out of sync. They have grown apart. They have both made a lot of progress, but they need to be resynced. And I think the way to resync it, again, in part, is about focusing more on the patient, but really bringing clinical research closer to the community. Let's face it, a lot of the patients that we need are not necessarily in the greatest academic center. And it's important to do research in this academic center to get some of the best data, but it's important that we also get the right patient. And not everybody has the NIH in his backyard or Hopkins across the street. Certainly, if you are really a sick patient, the burden shouldn't be put on you on flying to some center. You probably should have that sort of access to the same possibility in terms of research that you would have if you live next to the NIH or next to any other place. And in fact, I would just say that that is even less justifiable now, because with the technology that we have, the connectivity, it's all that needs to be established. And you can sort of create virtual network that would probably, in a cost-effective way, allow you to achieve this better engagement. So what are the key elements of the strategy that pharma is doing to engage more effectively in a patient in clinical trial and improve diversity in clinical trial? We think that there are three major components, and these in part are also aligned with advice provided by other organizations like IOM and others. I think it's important to raise awareness, but awareness that leads to participation. We can have the largest, most expensive PR campaign and get nowhere, because the important thing is the awareness comes with engagement. And I'll give you an example of what we are doing in that sense. Awareness means awareness of what is a clinical trial. What does it mean? What does it mean participating? What are the risks, the benefit? How does it change my life? And the other element of that is, where are these clinical trials? I think even us in our room here, do we all know, the clinical trial that are going on in this state right now, and so on, and the possibility, do we think that's a priority when we talk to the patient, as compared to other things? So those are all important things to keep in mind. The second bullet has to do more with, again, physicians. I think we realize that probably for a number of complex issues, some of which really unfortunately need to be followed up long term, because you have to create incentive for that. There is really a limited number of participation as investigator by physicians that really see some of these patients in the community in clinical trial. Again, there are probably not enough training program. There are not enough incentive to participate as an investigator in this trial. And then the last thing that I pretty much wanted to highlight is this issue of connectivity. It's our system is fragmented, it's silo, it's based on becoming the best center, and kind of doesn't tap into the community. There is not really a permanent network that has been built. I guess I will just go very quickly to this, but this is an example of the importance of the dialogue between patient and physician, even just talking about clinical trial, how that can change awareness in the patient and leading to participation in clinical trial. It's interesting because I think a study that I've demonstrated that overall the number of Americans that has ever participated in a clinical trial, I think it's around between 8 and 10% nationwide. But when people are asked if you would know about a clinical trial, would you participate? Would you be interested? That number goes up to 40-45%. That's really dramatic change. Still not optimal, but it tells a lot. Competency. I want to highlight this because competency goes beyond the physician. I mean, it involves the healthcare providers, but involves also the families of the patient. Building that sort of understanding that you really want to be a participant in the entire ecosystem. not a subject. You want to make sure that you are part of the decisions that are made, once you understand what your contribution could be to that decision. I think that is a very important element, and again, we are working on that as well. This is one of the programs that I want to highlight for you. It's called Research in Your Backyard. It started really as a state advocacy effort, primarily to show to governors what the impact of clinical trial is in terms of the jobs that are created and the research grants that are brought to the hospital, and the opportunity, of course, to advance care locally. But very slowly is evolving into a way to, again, start building that awareness among a broader set of stakeholders and kind of building the root of, that engagement that I've been talking about. But as I pointed out, this is not something that the industry can do alone, particularly in certain community. And this is the reason for recently we announced an important collaboration that we launched with the National Minority Quality Forum and Microsoft to really create that sort of virtual clinical trial network that I was talking to you about. Again, I don't want to talk about, I'm just going to talk about the element of this because I think it provided an excellent, at least conceptual example of how you can put the piece together here. Some of you have been, excellent partner already, like Andre and his organization in this. And the official launch is going to be at the end of October, so I want to kind of give you sort of a few hints here, but don't tell you too much, not to spoil it for you. But really the concept behind this is very simple. What can you do, really, in a cost-effective way to bring together in a virtual network community hospital, physician practices, investigator, the industry, patient advocacy organization, by creating a web portal that is linked, to a number of databases where data that come from different sources, and some will be already available at launch, can be in a way that, protect the anonymity and it's de-identified of, those involved, can pretty much go into the cloud and be searched by, either the investigator or the physician to really simplify sort of, identification of population that live in a certain zip code and are more affected by a certain disease and matching them to the requirement of a clinical trial. So, eventually when the system will be fully functional, you can imagine, you could be able to, by joining the network, do a search, goes into the cloud, you get, that there will be 35 patients in this state, in this zip code, that, belong to a certain healthcare center that potentially could qualify for this trial. Then communication will be sent, through this network to the actual structure, health center. It will go to the physician. Like literally, this is like kind of real time. And the physician may or may not choose to have that discussion with the patient, but it's literally like almost as an email, And then the patient can make the decision together with the physician if or not to participate to the clinical trial. So again, a lot of complexity there, but that's the reason for, this is a partnership that makes sense. Pharma is helping both with the, providing resources and expertise from our member company in terms of, the build-up of the portal. Microsoft, as a credible organization in terms of, working and protecting, privacy of data and electronic data and working with system in place, and the National Minority Quality Forum has, built a lot of relation with the different community. So again, it's not just a partnership; it's a partnership that makes sense. It has a common goal, but leverage really the different expertise that we have. I'll skip this, but pretty much this highlight why we are doing it. I was just saying the system right now is inefficient, is siloed. That doesn't mean that we need to invest a lot of, into actual building and infrastructure. Some definition here, but the first one is pretty much summarize what what the concept behind this is. It's sort of an internet-based network that connects different institutions, data warehouses, and patient researcher, healthcare professional. But look at the second bullet. That's the purpose, the goal. It's really help engage physician and patient in a community-based fashion who share a common disease experience. That's the feeling. It's almost like creating the feeling that this is you as a physician and your patient are sharing a common experience. We're just going to make it easier for you to tap this into what the possibilities should be. I close with this. This is more kind of the long-term vision. I didn't develop this. It's the Institute of Medicine in 2007, and I love this report. There is so much thinking about that. The problem is then nothing happened. In terms of it takes forever to implement them. So you have to start somewhere. And I think what we are doing is, and I didn't give you a lot of details, but this is not just going to be a lot of talk about the portal and so on. We are already identified pilot communities. We are already working on pilot study that we are going to do to show that system works with metrics that will show how much we're going to increase participation in this community. But really, at the end of the day, what you are seeing is I go back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is our chance. This is our chance to change the healthcare system. I think that maybe not our kids, hopefully our kids, but their generation or their kids' generation will live in a setting where when you go to the physicians, talking about a clinical trial or talking about the use of medicine or different dosage, it's part of the same conversation. It should be part of the same conversation. At any point in time, physician, the patient, the family should be put in a situation where they can make the best possible decision for the health of the person that needs it. Doesn't matter if that is participating in a clinical trial, is taking a new medicine or changing the formulation of another medicine. So for me, it's kind of embracing that vision, which I think it's going to help us moving, really transforming the healthcare system. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
There's over the entrance to the medical school where I still teach, Cornell Medical. It's now called Weill Cornell Medical College because Sanford Weill gave $100 million. And if you give $100 million, you get a medical school named for you. So there's an opportunity here for all of you. But over the medical school, there's a big stone engraving. And it talks about the 3 pillars of medicine: research, teaching, and patient care. Until today, I never thought of that as one. But now that hearing you and the rest of our faculty and all of you, research, teaching, patient care, it's all part of one. Floor open for questions, comments, anything. I know it's getting late in the day. Everybody wants to get home, but yeah. Bray.
So I want to say thank you very much for that insightful and inspiring talk, because we are transitioning to a learning healthcare system, and I think patient education is going to be a huge part of that. Patients need to know what information doesn't exist as evidence as much as we know what does exist. And so patients really aren't aware. I think Research America had a recent poll that showed that more patients would participate in research if they were aware of it. But also we have a lot of vested interests that we may not even understand as far as the national coverage determinations that are being made now. If the evidence isn't being collected, then we're not going to get access to therapies. And so we really need that culture change. It's going to take all parties to support that. Providers have been identified as kind of a weak link in the chain as far as referring to clinical trials, and we know that it can be a hassle the way the current system is set up. It's not incentivized properly to have providers participating more regularly in research. So I think it's going to take all stakeholders coming together to solve some of these problems. And just for those of you who aren't aware right now, there's a huge barrier that's come up recently with the support trial. The office of, actually, OHRP is holding up a public meeting. So if you want to go on the HHS website, the meeting is on August 28th. And what comes out of that related to informed consent and practice versus research and the integration of the two, that meeting is going to be incredibly important. Public comment can be submitted until September 9th, but the patients really need you to help us just access clinical trials and understand the value of the evidence. Will come back and help us improve our care.
Thank you. Yes.
Just a quick follow-up, but we also at Women Heart had done a recent project with Boston Scientific, actually, so this is about participation in device trials. But again, the number one reason was I was never asked. People who were willing, and then why weren't they?
Dave, do you want to comment at all about some of our activities at the college around clinical trials, or? Okay, end of story. Let me just say, and I didn't mean to embarrass you, but the college is engaged in a number of ventures, initiatives around clinical trial, patient enrollment, maintaining patients in clinical trials, working more closely with doctors, a whole variety of new kind of initiatives to try and do this. And I won't go further, but just to say we are doing that. And we're also involved, early stages at least, in developing the concept of training clinical trialists, not only in the US, but ex-US, where the need is even more so. And the need was not first perceived by us, but by our industry partners abroad, who have said, you know, you think it's hard to run a clinical trial here, try China. And because there aren't enough people who know how to even get involved. Somebody's listening, yeah. So yes, sir.
I'm also here representing HIMSS, the Health IT organization. I wanted to mention from an IT perspective, the last 10 years, we've kind of lost an opportunity. Back in 2001, the IOM and the NCVHS had recommended that we create a national health information infrastructure focused on accomplishing, similarly, three things: public health and research, information for providers, but also information for families of patients. What we saw since then, though, and through the High-Tech Act and some of the stimulus dollars, they went towards an infrastructure that would only allow the sharing of information between providers. And what we're seeing this year, that money, $600 million that went to states, is running out. And there's one paradigm is to create something called health record banks, which you may be aware of, which would allow, with patient consent, the ability for the patients and caregivers to have access to that information, shared with providers for the point of care access, a longitudinal medical record, but also the ability to opt into information to be used for research. And so there's right now an effort to get out to these failing health information exchanges and say, there's actually a better way. It's actually cheaper. It's about 10% of the cost of the HIEs. So it'd be interesting to
Well, actually, and again, we are still collecting input, so and we are really looking for partners to be involved to provide, input, not just to join the network. The project is almost. So let me just, comment on a couple of things. We have been kept this initially, focus on a particular issue, which is the issue of diversity in clinical trial. We have also wanted to be within that, being inclusive, and we already wanted to start from something that we have. For example, by the day of launch, you already are going to have the National Health Index, which is already hosted by the National Minority Equality Forum, which is a database of, I don't remember exactly how many records, but a pretty substantial amount of records where you pretty much track disease based on zip code, literally, and it's much more powerful than some of the other tools that are available, and they will be linked with clinicaltrial.gov right away. So there are things that will be upfront available to anybody really that can join the network. Second stage is the one that we are already start working on, and that's the most challenging. We are identifying integrated healthcare centers, and we again have, this is public, like one of the one that has been most engaged is the Doctors Hospital at Renaissance in Texas, with whom we are working with and try to figure out how we can take, their electronic health records in a way, again, that protects all the HIPAA requirements and other, and migrate them into the Azure's cloud, which is the Microsoft system, as you know, and pilot it. I think the issue is we don't want to think too big, and we are thinking in terms of pilots. Because to your point, at the end of the day, if we don't show examples that a system like this works with numbers and metrics, there will still be the issue. It's too complicated, the electronic health records are in different format, who controls what, who owns what, and these are issues that we are still facing, but we are sort of creating that baseline. Another things that we are working on with Microsoft is the release of a mobile app, which is built or connected to the Patient Vault application that Microsoft has, which will distribute, free, pretty much every patient as well as healthcare provider if they want. That has almost kind of, it's a very interesting app. I mean, just looking, developed by as what we call a medical avatar, just resemble yourself in the app. And by that app, the patient will be able to share whatever information he or she feels comfortable, wants to be, put in the cloud for searching in terms of participation to the clinical trial. So that would allow, patient to engage on something that, again, it's modern technology, will be linked to a network in a protect, secure way. Now, so the concepts are there. There are a lot of complexity to your point. But as, we collect input, that you're certainly welcome to, be happy to hear your input. We are start troubleshooting and try to do this in a stage phase. Because, I mean, one risk in this situation is also you create expectation that you cannot meet then. And our goal is to stay focused at the beginning, eventually expand it, but really being able to deliver what we say we deliver, and as soon as we can. We don't need to wait 5-6 years.
A fact you might not know, the ratio, you probably know this, the ratio of pharma spending on prescriber initiatives and patient initiatives. Anybody want to hazard a guess? Prescriber initiatives versus patient initiatives, spending by the pharmaceutical industry. Nobody wants to hazard.
I don't have that one.
You're 97-3. Boy, you phenomenal. Get up here. No, so that, I mean, there's so, if you think about it, 1 or 2 more % spending could have an enormous difference in some of these programs. Any other question? Yes.
Thank you. First off, that was a great presentation and actually a good way to wrap up the day in terms of looking at where we're going forward. One of the things that I do for ASHP is look at some of the emerging clinical trial designs and what it might mean to our members in terms of how to use these drugs in practice. And there's all the expedited pathways, but one of the things I've really focused a lot on in the past couple years is pharmacogenetic information. And so I'm really pleased to see the collaboration that you're going to have with the National Minority Quality Forum, because I think that's one part of the things that you'll find there. Obviously, there's other aspects culturally to look at as well. Can you talk a little bit in terms of, when we talk about pharmacogenomics within my organization, we focus a lot on post-marketing surveillance because we think there's a lot that's going to be learned from there, but this will help on the pre-side. Can you talk a little bit about how the industry is looking at theirs,
Yes.
pre and post?
Well, I'll talk with example, which is the, this is a perfect example of personalized medicine and patient stratification. If you look at the cancer field, the way it started is you were going to, phase 3, sometimes phase 4, and then you were just kind of retrospectively using pharmacogenomic data to understand if they were in subgroups of patients, they were, responding more or less to a certain treatment. And then in your next trial, you would kind of try to utilize that knowledge to stratify up front. I think this is becoming now much more of the routine. You don't wait until you have, again, the phase 3, but up front, you have enough confidence with that data being used for retrospective analysis that you can say, I can just segment and design the trial for that particular population. I can tell you that that kind of thinking is already, and maybe here is more my hat of my previous job when I was working for pharmaceutical, actual pharmaceutical company, 3 of them, is moving, the field is moving that direction, for example, in the immunology area, where you are kind of start using that sort of concept to see, can we, for example, in RA, when we do our trial, define if the best approach would be with a biologic versus with a small molecule with a specific target. We are not there yet, but I would just say that learning from the cancer experience, that is moving more and more into the direction. But to the other point that you made, that also takes, a change in education. Still, when you talk with regulators, it's all about, the 2 pivotal trials for registration and so on. But if you look at, some of the exceptions, for example, for some, drug that have been recently approved for selected subtype of lung cancer or for rare disease like cystic fibrosis, what made the difference there was the patient advocacy interaction with the industry and the regulators up front. You don't have to wait until you are in registration phase. And again, one of the other ideas that we are kind of working on right now is, for example, how we can leverage the NIH CTSA program to create a stable network for the genetic disease. We already started conversation with NCATS, Collins and his group. So the thing is, the points are there. The issue is that, we have been used to operate in silos, and where dialogue started, we're like limited in time and limited to 2 stakeholders rather than being comprehensive. It's probably a long answer to your question, but I think illustrate probably, the trend.
Any other questions? So if not, we're really coming to a close.